everyone. My name is Elijah. This is my associate, Nick. And today we're here to talk to you about a very cool physics concept, something that actually affects you every single day of your life, and you might not even know it. It's called air resistance.
Now, before we get started, we want you to spend a moment thinking about the questions you see on screen.
Yeah, and don't worry too much if you don't know the right answer right now. Whole idea of these questions is really just to get your gears turning, get you thinking about the concepts we're going to talk about, and because we're actually going to circle back to these questions at the end and really dive into the answers with you. So speaking of diving, first question you should see there is about skydiving. So imagine with me, if you will, that I am a professional skydiver, and I'm up in my airplane, and I jump out, as a skydiver does, and I'm falling through the air. What position do you think I'm going to want to put my body in as I fall that would make me fall the fastest? So it could either be like a pencil dive or like a big belly flop. So that's the first question to think about.
Now, the second question I want you to think about, why is it so much windier when you're moving fast in a car versus standing still? I'm sure you guys have been in a car with the windows down, you're driving fast. Why is there so much wind blowing in at you versus, you stopped at the stoplight, nothing's really happening, there's not really any wind there. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and the final question to think about is about airplanes. So I don't know if you guys have ever been on an airplane before, but they fly super duper high up in the air, actually at a height of 30,000 feet above the ground, which is insane. I mean, if you've been on one, you can't even see the ground at that height. So yeah, we kind of want to get you thinking, why do you think airplanes fly so excessively high up in the sky the way they do?
Right. So you might be wondering, air resistance. What is air resistance? So basically, air resistance is a force. Elijah, could you quickly remind us what a force is?
I would love to do that, Nick. So a force is basically any kind of pushing or pulling on an object that would cause it to maybe speed up or slow down or actually change direction. So air resistance is a force that always pushes on an object and causes it to slow down.
Right. So air is made up of these really tiny particles that we can't see. And every time you move through the air, you have to push these particles out of the way. And these particles push back on you, which is what you feel as air resistance.
Yeah, let me actually give you an example that you might be able to relate to. So remember back before COVID when we didn't have to do the whole physical distancing thing? Imagine you're in a room and you're trying to get to the other side of the room, but it's full of people. There's people everywhere. I don't know, maybe it's a party or whatever. People all over the place. If you want to get to the other side of that room, you got to move people out of your way, kind of shimmy through, maybe ask them politely to move. I don't know if people have manners, maybe they do that, but you got to get them out of your way in order to get through the room. And they're kind of in your way, they're kind of pushing back on you as you go through. So that's actually exactly how air resistance works. If you imagine the room is like the air, and all the people in the room are those air particles Nick was talking about, as you move through the air, you have to move those air particles out of your way. It's kind of the same thing.
Right. So these tiny particles push back at us whenever we move through the air, and they slow us down. So now that we know a little bit about air resistance, let's try to think about how we can control how much air resistance an object feels.
Absolutely. So when scientists were kind of first, figuring out what air resistance was and how it worked, they're trying to think about what types of things would affect it. And one of the first things I'm sure they realized that affected how much air resistance an object feels is the size and the shape of that object.
Right. So let's do a quick little experiment to see how an object's shape and size affects air resistance.
So what we have here is two identical pieces of very boring, normal, plain white paper.
Very regular paper.
And what we're going to do is we're going to hold them up above this little desk thing, and we're going to drop them at the exact same time. And we're going to see what happens as they fall. So let's do that now. Okay, let's do that now.
Right, so it looks like they fell at about the same speed and kind of hit the table at the same time. One flirted to the ground, but that's
they got to the table
they
around
the table at the same time.
But Nick, let's try something. All right, let's take this piece of paper and scrunch it all up. Okay, here nice and down. Scrunch it up into a tiny little ball. Okay. Now I'm going to take these same two pieces of paper and hold them above our little desk. I'm going to drop them again at the same time, and we're going to see what happens.
Whoa, the scrunch one fell so much quicker and hit the table first. And all you did was change its shape.
That's exactly right. So what we've done here is we've taken our piece of paper and we've made it a lot smaller. As you can see when you hold these side by side, this one looks a lot smaller now, right? And we've also changed its shape. So this one's kind of big and flat, And this one's nice and small and round.
Right. So its smaller shape allows it to move through the air and it impacts less air particles. So this one kind of catches all the air particles. This one can kind of just move through the air. And this round shape helps the air particles kind of flow around it easier. Pretty cool.
Yeah, really cool, actually. So anyways, people still thinking about this type of stuff, and they actually found there's a few other things that affect air resistance as well. So one of those things they discovered is speed. How fast an object actually moves through the air has a big impact on how much air resistance it feels.
Right. So now imagine you're with me. We're in a car. We're going pretty fast. You know, you got your hand out the window. It goes like, gets blown back a lot. And you pull your hand back inside. And now we come up to a stoplight. You stick your hand out the window. It's not really getting blown back anymore. Why is there so much wind blowing back on your hand when you're moving so fast?
Well, Nick, that's because of the amount of air resistance that your hand is experiencing when it's out the window. So when you're sitting still and you stick your arm out the window, you're not moving any air particles out of the way with that arm. It's just kind of out there, but you're not moving through the air. So there's zero air resistance on your arm at that point. But as you start to pick up speed and start to move, now as you're moving, you have to move air particles out of your way to move through the air. So you start to feel more air resistance. And the faster you go, the more air particles you have to move out of your way, and the more air resistance your arm is going to feel with speed.
Pretty interesting. Also, just back to shape quickly, you'll notice if you have your hand out the window and it's like that, you're catching all the air particles. But if you turn it sideways, the air particles can kind of flow around it easier, and you've decreased your hand's air resistance.
Exactly. So one more thing that we want to talk to you guys about that affects air resistance. Although this one, I don't know, you might not have thought of this already. It might be a little more surprising to you. Maybe it's a concept you're not that familiar with, but it has to do with something called air density, or how dense the air is.
Air density. Right. So if air is more dense, that means it has more of these little particles in a given space than less dense air. And when you move through the more dense air, you therefore have to move more of these little particles out of your way. So there's more things pushing back on you. So you feel more air resistance when you move through more dense air.
That's exactly right. So going back to that example I was talking about, that you're trying to get through this crowded room. Imagine you're back in this room and you're trying to get the other side, but there's only like maybe two people in there. I don't know, maybe your mom, your brother, your sister, whatever. There's like only two, maybe three people in the room. It's pretty easy to get yourself through that room. You can pretty much just run straight through, right? Because you're probably not going to bump into anyone, probably not going to have to move anyone out of your way. However, if the room is completely packed full, like shoulder to shoulder people, it's just completely full, it's going to be really hard to get through because now there's a bunch of people you got to move out of your way to get to the other side. And that's what the idea of density. When there's less air particles in the air, it's less dense, and you experience less air resistance. But when there's more particles in the air, it's more dense, you experience more air resistance.
Pretty cool. So we shot a quick video showing the difference different air densities can make. In this video, we have two tubes, and inside the tubes is a feather and a marble. For this demo, we're going to ignore the marble.
Ignore the marble.
Don't worry about the marble.
Don't pay attention
Don't pay attention to the marble. So in both tubes, we have the feather, and in one tube is filled with normal air, like what's around us right now.
Yeah, just the normal air like you're breathing in. Yeah. But in the other tube, what we've done is we've essentially sucked out almost all of the air particles from that tube. So both tubes have the same kind of feather, but one tube, normal air particles. One tube sucked most of them out, all right? And what we're going to do is flip both of those tubes upside down and take a look at what happens to the feather as it falls. So let's check that video out now.
Wow, so what do we see? In the tube with normal air, the feather falls pretty slow, like we expect. This is because it's experiencing lots of air resistance.
But do you guys notice what's happening in that second tube with the less dense air? The feather falls a lot faster because there are less air particles in the tube to resist its motion. That means it's experiencing less air resistance, and that's why it's able to hit the bottom of the tube so much sooner. Pretty cool, right? Alrighty, so what did we see there? Well, as we already described, you guys saw that the feather that was in the less dense air fell a lot faster, which is, I think, pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Now, we're kind of, at this point, we're going to circle back now to those questions that we had posed at the beginning. And we're going to really try and dive into these answers and take a look. So we're going to put up a poll now for that first question. Right. So I'm a skydiver. I've jumped out of my plane. I'm falling through the air. What position do you think is going to make me fall faster? Tucked in straight up and down like a pencil, or opened up big and wide like a big belly flop? If I'm falling through the sky and I tuck myself in straight up and down like a pencil, like this, falling through the air, then my feet are kind of like a small shape. So I don't have to move that many air particles out of my way. And because I make my body nice and straight, those air particles can flow around me quite nicely. Now, on the flip side, if I wanted to do the opposite, right? If I wanted to slow myself down as much as possible, then I'm going to go big. I'm going to make myself look nice and big while I'm falling through the sky like this. Because what that does is it allows way more air particles to hit me and bounce off my body and slow me down. It gives me more air resistance as I fall through the air.
Pretty cool. Right, on to the next question. So, why does it seem windier in a car compared to when you're standing still? Is it because the wind just gets stronger? It has nothing to do with you. Or because air resistance is stronger when you move faster? Or because of the air conditioner? Or because the car is a bigger shape than you, so it feels more air resistance? Which of these options do you guys think it is? Air resistance is stronger when you move faster. So you're in the car, you're not moving. When you start moving, you have to move more and more air particles out of your way as you go faster. So it gets windier as you go faster because all these air particles start pushing back on you the quicker you go. And that's what you feel as wind, but it's actually air resistance.
You bet. So last question for you guys. We're going to bring up the poll now. This one's going to be a little trickier. So try and think about what we've talked about. But why do you guys think that airplanes fly so high up in the sky? Is it so that they don't hit any buildings? Or is it because they can't see through the clouds, so they have to get above the clouds? Or is it because the air is less dense up high? Or because there's less gravity up high? So those are your four options. Bit of a trickier question. Let's see what you guys can do with this one.
Because the air is less dense.
Wow, you guys,
Nice.
I wish you could see my smile right now. I'm super proud of you all. That's great.
Very proud.
So yeah, Nick can actually explain why that is. It has to do with gravity. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and explain that, Nick?
Okay, so if you all remember how I said air is made up of these really tiny particles, right? Well, just like me or Elijah or this table here, these particles feel the effects of gravity. So gravity is packing down a large amount of these particles closer to the surface of the Earth. So when you get really high up, there's less air particles up there, and there's therefore less air particles to push back on the plane as it flies through the air, so he can go faster and use up less fuel.
Exactly. So, and I mean, if you guys said so that they don't hit any buildings, you're right. I mean, we wouldn't want planes crashing into buildings all the time. That would be pretty bad.
Be pretty bad.
But the tallest building in the world is only 3,000 feet high. And I mentioned that planes fly at 30,000 feet, which is like 10 times that. So planes could get away with flying at 4,000, 5,000, and not be too worried about hitting the buildings. So as much as that's true, the reason they fly as high as they do has to do with that air density. Well, I think that's pretty much everything we have for you guys. Thanks so much for coming out and listening. Hopefully you guys learned a little something about air resistance along the way.
Yeah, thank you guys. And if you wanted to explore the concept of air resistance a little bit more, we provided a link to a fun little applet in your pamphlet. We hope you check it out and have fun with that.
Yeah, and because all you guys seem to be geniuses out there, whenever you are like 15 years down the road and you're all brilliant scientists designing the next super speed rocket, just keep in mind what you learned about air resistance here today. Remember, it was old Nick and I who taught it to you because we'd like a little bit of that credit. Thanks so much, guys.